On a brisk morning in downtown Seattle, James Carter, a black man in his late 40s, stepped into the gleaming lobby of Carter Trust Bank at precisely 9 a.m. The air carried the faint chill of autumn, seeping through the glass doors that parted with a soft hiss, welcoming him into the world he'd painstakingly built. Sunlight poured through towering windows, bathing the polished marble floors in a warm golden glow that felt almost mocking against the tightness in his chest. This was his empire, a high-end institution he'd raised from nothing, its quiet hum of efficiency a testament to years of grit and sacrifice. Today, though, he wasn't the CEO striding in with a tailored suit and a commanding presence. He wore a simple gray button-down, dark jeans, and scuffed sneakers, unassuming, invisible, just another face in the crowd. His mission was humble. Withdraw $15,000 from his personal account, a transaction that should have been as routine as breathing. Yet, as he crossed the threshold, a flicker of unease stirred deep within him. He'd walked these floors 1,000 times, but today felt different, heavier, like the weight of unseen eyes already judging him. The soft chime of the service bell punctuated the air, and employees in crisp blazers moved with practiced precision behind the counters. Clients stood in orderly lines, their transactions flowing seamlessly. James's sharp gaze swept the room, landing on a white man in his 50s, clad in a navy coat, chatting easily with a teller who handed him stacks of cash. $20, 000. James noted with a pang of something bitter. The man walked away unbothered, unquestioned, free. James's jaw tightened, a familiar ache blooming in his chest. He'd fought for this place to be different, to rise above the silent prejudices that shadowed his life. Today, he'd see if it truly had. James Carter lingered near the edge of the bustling lobby of Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, his breath steady, but his heart thudding with a quiet, simmering resolve. The morning light cast long shadows across the marble, and he watched as a white customer, Robert Hayes, a man in his early 50s with silver streaks in his hair and a navy coat draped over his shoulders, leaned casually against the counter. The teller, Sarah Monroe, a young woman in her late 20s with a bright smile and a navy blazer, counted out crisp stacks of bills with practiced ease. James's eyes narrowed as he caught the amount on the slip Robert tucked into his pocket. $20,000. Sarah's voice was warm, her laughter light as she handed over the money. No hesitation, no questions, just a nod and a "Have a great day, sir." Robert flashed a grin, adjusted his coat, and strolled toward the exit, his steps unhurried, his privilege a shield James could feel from across the room. The sight twisted something deep inside him, a knot of anger, yes, but also a bone-deep weariness. He'd seen this too many times. The effortless trust extended to men like Robert, while men like him had a claw for every scrap of respect. His hands flexed at his sides, the calluses on his palms a reminder of the decades spent building this bank, this sanctuary, only to stand here now, invisible in his own domain. The soft clink of coins and rustle of paper filled the air, but to James, it sounded like a taunt, a reminder of the divide he'd sworn to erase. He exhaled sharply, forcing the bitterness down, his resolve hardening like steel. If this place still bent under the weight of old biases, he'd root them out himself, one transaction at a time. James Carter edged closer to the teller counter at Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the morning buzz of the lobby humming like a live wire around him. He'd just watched Robert Hayes saunter off with $20,000, and now it was his turn to test the waters. With a sly grin tugging at his lips, he stepped up to Sarah Monroe, the same perky teller in her late 20s who'd been all smiles for Robert. Her blonde ponytail bobbed as she shuffled papers. But when James slid into her line of sight, that sunshine vibe dimmed faster than a cheap light bulb. No good morning, or how can I help you today? Just a flat, bored stare as she barely flicked her eyes up from her clipboard. Fill this out, she muttered, shoving it toward him like he was some rookie crashing her VIP party, then tossed his driver's license aside without a second glance. James raised an eyebrow, amusement bubbling up despite the sting. Oh, this was going to be good. He could have whipped out his CEO badge right then. Boom, game over. But where's the fun in that? Instead, he played along, grabbing a pen with a dramatic flourish, like he was signing the Declaration of Independence. He scribbled his $15,000 withdrawal request, imagining Sarah's face when the plot twist hit. Her icy tone, a challenge. Her dismissive shove of his ID, a rookie move in this little improv scene. He slid the clipboard back with a smirk, leaning in just enough to catch her off guard. "All set, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, daring her to keep up the act. Her lips twitched, but no smile cracked through, just a wall of indifference. James chuckled under his breath. Time to crank up the entertainment, he thought. Let's see how long she lasts. James Carter squared off with Sarah Monroe at the teller counter of Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the air crackling with the kind of tension you find in a showdown scene. Sarah, the 20-something teller with a ponytail tighter than her attitude, had just shot down his $15,000 withdrawal with a flimsy, "we don't do that" excuse. James, still riding the high of his own amusement, wasn't letting it slide. "Different, he teased, his grin sharp as a razor. But then Sarah's eyes flicked sideways, a sneaky little signal, and James followed her gaze like a detective hot on a clue. There, behind the glass wall of the manager's office, stood Linda Grayson, a steely woman in her early 50s, arms crossed, her tailored suit screaming authority. She gave a tiny nod, so subtle you'd miss it if you blinked, and Sarah straightened up like she'd just gotten a power-up in a video game. "Oh ho!" James crowed, clapping his hands like he'd cracked the case. "The boss lady isn't on the act. This is a two-player game now." Linda's piercing stare locked onto him, her expression cool as ice, but James wasn't fazed. He was practically directing this comedy himself. Sarah puffed up, bolstered by her manager's silent cheerleading, and huffed. "I told you, we can't process it." James leaned in, wagging a finger like a talk show host. "Can't or won't, Sarah? I smell a plot twist brewing, and I'm here for it." Linda's nod had flipped a switch, and Sarah's frostiness turned downright arctic. James chuckled, imagining her as a sidekick in a buddy cop flick, taking cues from the big boss. He glanced back at Linda, tipping an imaginary hat. "Nice teamwork, ladies. What's the next scene? Security?" "Popcorn's ready." He knew the game was escalating, and he was loving every second of it. James Carter faced off with Sarah Monroe at the teller counter of Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the standoff now a full-on theatrical production. Sarah, the 20-something teller with a glare that could freeze lava, had just gotten her silent marching orders from Linda Grayson, the 50-something manager watching from her glass wall perch. James, still grinning like he was hosting a game show, wasn't about to let the fun die. Then Linda strutted out, heels clicking like a metronome of doom, her suit so sharp it could slice bread. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice smooth as a used car salesman's pitch. "I hear you're trying to make a large withdrawal today." James tilted his head, eyes twinkling. "Oh, you heard right, Linda. Just a casual $15,000. Pocket change, really." Linda's smile was all teeth, no warmth, as she launched into her spiel. "We have security protocols for transactions this size," she purred, like she was unveiling the rules to a secret club. James clapped once, loud and dramatic. "Protocols. I love a good buzzword. Hit me with it." Linda didn't flinch. "We need to verify additional information," she said, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Verify?" James echoed, feigning shock. "You mean my info? 'Cause I saw Robert Hayes waltz out with $20,000. No additional info required." He waved a hand toward the exit, then leaned in, stage whispering. "What's the VIP password I'm missing, Linda? Is it pretty please?" Her jaw tightened, but she pressed on. "I can't discuss other customers." James laughed, a big, booming sound. "Oh, but you can grill me like I'm auditioning for a heist flick. Look it up. My account's right there." Linda's mask slipped just a hair, and James knew he'd hit the jackpot. "Next round, folks," he crowed, ready for whatever curveball she'd throw. James Carter was deep in the ring with Linda Grayson at Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the lobby now his personal comedy stage. Linda, the 50-something manager with a suit sharper than a chef's knife, had just dropped her security protocols line, and James was eating it up. "Verify my info?" He'd shot back, grinning like a kid who caught the teacher in a fib. But Linda wasn't playing. Her eyes narrowed, and she snapped, Cooperate, Mr. Carter, like she was a sheriff in a Wild West flick. That's when James pulled out the big guns. He whipped his phone from his pocket, hit record with dramatic flourish, and declared, "Action!" Loud enough to make Sarah Monroe flinch behind the counter. "You're refusing my $15,000 withdrawal," he narrated, voice clear as a news anchor. "Despite my ID, my account, and plot twist, letting Robert Hayes snag $20,000 without a peep." Linda's jaw twitched like she'd bitten a lemon, and Sarah froze mid-arm cross. James spun toward the security guard, Mike Tanner, a burly 30-something with a buzz cut, who'd been lurking by the door. Cue the muscle. James called, and right on script, Mike marched over, boots thumping like a drum roll. "Step outside." Mike barked, grabbing James's arm with just enough oomph to yank him back. James stumbled, laughing as he went, "Oh, we're doing the dramatic exit now? Oscar-worthy, Mike." His shoulder bumped Mike's chest, and then bam! His back hit the glass door, swinging it wide. The lobby gasped like an audience at a magic trick gone wrong, but James kept rolling, phone still up, filming the chaos. "And scene!" he shouted, tumbling out into the crisp Seattle air, already plotting his encore. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. James Carter landed outside Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the glass doors slamming shut behind him like the curtains on a botched improv skit. His sneakers skidded on the sidewalk, but he caught himself, still clutching his phone, the red recording blinking like a co-star. The sting of Mike Tanner's shove lingered in his shoulder, but James was too wired to care. His blood hummed with adrenaline and a dash of glee. Then a shadow loomed. Derek Jones, a 30-something black security guard with a weary slouch and eyes that had seen this script before. Derek bent down, snagging James's discarded ID from the pavement with slow, almost theatrical reverence, dusting it off like it was a prop from a heist movie. "Here you go, man," he said, handing it over with a smirk that said, "I get it." James took it, grinning wide. "My hero. Should have known they'd cast a twist like you." Derek chuckled, low and dry, glancing back at Mike, still posted like a bouncer at the door. "This place," Derek muttered, shaking his head. "We're just the extras they trot out to look good. But this," his voice dropped, a conspiratorial whisper. "Same old show, different day." James clapped him on the shoulder, laughing. "Oh, I'm stealing that line for the sequel, Derek." He stepped back, pocketing his ID, and fished out his phone again, not to record this time, but to dial. "Time for the big reveal, folks," he announced to no one, thumb hovering over the screen like a director calling cut. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. "Thomas J. Carter." A crisp voice answered, and James's grin turned wicked. "Cue the fireworks," he said, loud enough for Derek to hear, who just snorted and muttered, "This I gotta see." Game on. James Carter stood on the sidewalk outside Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the morning chill biting at his knuckles as he pocketed his phone after summoning Thomas J. Carter. The glass doors loomed behind him, a silent barrier, but the real storm was brewing inside. Minutes later they parted, and Thomas, a wiry man in his late 50s with a steel-gray suit and a stride that cut through the air, stepped out, his face hardening as he spotted James. Derek Jones, a 30-something guard, lingered nearby, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Thomas didn't waste a beat, brushing past Mike Tanner, without a glance, and storming back into the lobby. James followed, the air shifting as Thomas zeroed in on Linda Grayson, who'd reappear behind the counter, her polish cracking. "Wasn't expecting," Linda started, but Thomas cut her off, voice like a blade. "Clearly, because this wouldn't be happening." Linda flinched, her mask slipping. "Sir, it's a misunderstanding," she tried, but Thomas leaned in, eyes blazing. "No misunderstanding. Just profiling dressed up as policy." He turned to James briefly, then back to Linda. "Did you even check his account before deciding he couldn't touch his own money?" Linda's silence was deafening, her face flushing crimson. Thomas pressed on, voice low but lethal. "If this is how you treat customers, or worse, others like him, you're done. Legally." The lesson hung heavy. Power doesn't excuse prejudice, and ignorance isn't a shield. James watched, a quiet satisfaction settling in. Thomas wasn't just avenging him. He was dismantling a system that thrived on snap judgments. People build places like this to rise above bias, Thomas said, almost to himself, not to let it fester. Linda shrank. Mike shifted uncomfortably, and James nodded. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come when the teacher's the one you least expect. James Carter stood just inside the lobby of Carter Trust Bank in downtown Seattle, the tension thick as Thomas J. Carter, the late 50s powerhouse in a gray suit, laid down the law. Linda Grayson, her once icy confidence now a puddle, fumbled behind the counter as Thomas's words sliced through her excuses. "Clean it out," James said, his voice steady final. Thomas nodded once, and the staff scrambled. Sarah Monroe's hand shook as she counted out $15,000 in crisp bills, stacking them before James like an offering. No debates, no delays, just the money he'd earned, fought for, built this place to protect. The lesson wasn't just in the cash. It was in the reckoning. Trust isn't a privilege to be doled out by whim. It's a right, and denying has consequences. Thomas turned to Derek Jones, the 30-something guard who'd stayed rooted by James's side, his quiet solidarity a lifeline. "You're promoted, effective now," Thomas said, catching Derek off guard. "You deserve better than serving under this." Derek blinked, stunned, as James slid a stack of bills, $1,000, toward him. "Take the day," James said, meeting his eyes. Derek hesitated, then took it, a slow nod passing between them. The gesture wasn't charity. It was recognition. Sometimes the ones who see the rot clearest are the ones stuck in it deepest. As James pocketed the rest, the lobby hummed on, but the air had shifted. Linda's flush deepened, Mike Tanner's gaze dropped, and Sarah avoided looking up. The lesson sank in. Power misuse crumbles, and those who wield it carelessly answer for it. James had built this bank to break cycles, not bend them, and today, he reminded everyone, even himself, that real change starts when you stop waiting for permission to demand what's yours.